Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
A routine work meeting at the estate with the boss, or is it not that simple? In today's story, we'll answer that question. Have a good one. Kurt, you rode his thoroughbred all day. It's only fair that he rides yours tonight, she said, turning and leaving the bedroom. What the heck? I muttered to myself. My thoughts drifted back to the events of the last day. It all began with a trip to Audra's home in Rolling Hills, California. Audra was excited but a little nervous. It was the first time her boss, Chad Haverson, the owner of her company, had invited the department heads to his home. We were supposed to stay until Sunday evening, then return to our apartment in Los Angeles. As I reflected on the trip, I wondered if everything had been planned from the start. There might not have been specific plans, but perhaps there were hints. My anger, already at a high level from her parting remark, only intensified as these thoughts flooded my mind. I continued to recall the events of last night and today. We arrived at a prestigious gated community in Los Angeles, home to many celebrities and wealthy individuals. On the way to one of the most impressive estates, a guard greeted us. The estate itself was breathtaking. Its sheer size left us in awe. I'm sure Audra was just as stunned. The house was a luxurious, two-story Italian-style mansion, spanning around 10,000 square feet. I knew Audra's company was multinational, but I hadn't realized it was successful enough to afford its owner such an extravagant residence, especially in this exclusive area. Chad met us at the door, pleasant enough but with a subtle air of pretension beneath the surface. By 7 o'clock, all the department heads had arrived. Audra, as the director of human resources, was among them. I felt proud of her. At only 29, she had already held HR executive positions at 3 different companies, and this latest promotion to director was a testament to her hard work. There were 4 other couples there, and the dinner was filled with interesting conversations, naturally touching on work. I felt a bit out of place. As an industrial engineer, I spend most of my days working on projects, either alone or with a small group. Despite that, I think I held up pretty well. Sure, I'm a bit of a nerd, but I'm not socially awkward. That night, in our private suite, we made love. Afterward, we hugged and fell asleep, smiling. I woke up early the next morning and lay there, admiring my beautiful wife. We had met at a Starbucks 5 years ago. She had grabbed her latte from the barista, quickly turned around, and ran straight into me. The lid popped off her cup, and hot coffee spilled onto my chest. Damn, that's hot. I gasped, stepping back and pulling my shirt away from my chest. At first, I didn't even look at the woman who'd burned me. I was more concerned about my shirt. Great, now I need to buy a new one, I thought. Audra was mortified and immediately apologetic. When I finally looked up, our eyes met. It wasn't love at first sight, I'm logical enough to know that, but there was an instant connection. She fussed around, not knowing what to do. I'm really sorry. Are you okay? Can I buy you a new shirt or pay for the cleaning? She stammered. I replied, don't worry about it. It's an old shirt, probably already outlived its usefulness. I thought I was being clever. She laughed, and that was the beginning. 5 years later, here we were. We dated for a couple of years and then got married. After we showered and dressed, we headed down to the dining room, where a buffet breakfast was served. We filled our plates and sat down to eat. We were nearly finished when Chad entered from the barn, dressed for horseback riding. So, he said, everyone will have the chance to ride horses along the trails. I'll show you the homes of some of my more famous friends and neighbors. Rolling Hills is an equestrian community. Many residents have horses, and there are trails throughout the neighborhood and surrounding hills that we'll be using. I smiled, thinking back to my Midwest upbringing. We had horses on our farm, and I'd always been confident around them. I was even a member of 4-H and competed in horse shows during my early teens. Almost a decade had passed since I last rode a horse, and I was looking forward to it. Chad continued, I have horses suitable for beginners, as well as ones that need experienced riders. Let's head to the barn, and I'll match each of you with a horse based on your experience. I was impressed by the barn, the horses, and the tack. Chad mentioned that, due to the large group, he had borrowed a few horses from his neighbors. I assure you that they are all quality animals, and you have nothing to fear, Chad said, as if we were all inexperienced townspeople. His complacency annoyed me, so I said, I'd like to ride that thoroughbred. I walked up to the magnificent horse standing proudly in its stall. She wasn't even saddled yet. Hey, Chad warned, Brandy is a temperamental animal. I don't think she's suited for anyone here. I opened the stall and approached the horse, letting her know I was an experienced rider. She didn't even flinch, sensing my confidence. Chad noticed this and smirked. If you're really determined to ride Brandy, I should warn you, I'm not responsible if she throws you. I could tell he was trying to scare me and assert his authority in front of the others. Audra chimed in, Kurt, maybe you should listen to Chad and choose another horse. Let him pick one for you. My male ego was bruised by her lack of faith. She had seen my riding trophies and photographs, why'd out my abilities now? No, I'm sure Brandy and I will do just fine, I replied. Chad grinned and ordered his groom to saddle Brandy. I helped the groom as he worked, noticing Brandy was a little nervous around him. I wondered how Chad treated her. As we all saddled up, Chad said, We'll be walking along the trails, and I'll point out some of the houses of famous people. Afterward, we'll head back for lunch. We spent at least 2 hours strolling through the community, while Chad introduced us to the important neighbors. I pretended to be interested, but my real focus was on making Brandy comfortable with my riding style. I became more confident with how she responded, eager to let her run. Finally, as Audra and I rode side by side, we came to a section of undeveloped hills where horse owners could gallop. Let's speed up and let these majestic animals show us what they can do, I suggested. Kurt, I don't feel comfortable doing this, Audra replied. Let's stay with the group. Audra, you're riding a quarter horse, one of the most stable and balanced breeds. Trust your horse, she knows what to do. I don't want to take any chances, she insisted. At that moment, Chad rode up on his horse and said, We'll head back to the house now. I think we've ridden enough for today. I was hoping to let this wonderful horse stretch her legs. Could we spend a little more time in the open? Well, Kurt, you do look confident in the saddle, but most of us are inexperienced. I wouldn't want anyone's overconfidence to lead to injury, Chad replied, his tone condescending. He understood I knew how to ride, but in his eyes, I was just a simple nerd. He was challenging me, and I decided to play along with his arrogance. Audra thinks it's better to stay with the group, I teased. I wouldn't want anyone to feel inferior because of their lack of experience. For a brief moment, I saw a look of contempt cross Chad's face. Well, he said, let's have some lunch, and maybe afterward, you and I can come back and let these animals run. I didn't like how he referred to the horses as animals, he spoke of them like they were nothing more than dumb creatures. During lunch, the others discussed the houses and celebrities they had seen, while Chad's chest puffed with pride at every compliment. After lunch, we sat on the large terrace, chatting. I listened with half an ear, my mind on galloping through the hills. As several guests excused themselves to change out of their sweaty clothes, Chad turned to me and said, So, Kurt, do you still think you can handle Brandy in the open areas? I knew he was trying to get me to back down, and Audra sensed it too. Darling, she said, let's just relax here and talk to the others. She didn't want me to do anything that would make her boss look bad, but I couldn't stand his patronizing attitude. I'd love to go for a ride, I replied, but I don't want to tear you away from your guests. I either challenged him or gave him the opportunity to decline, but I could see he wanted me to fail. They'll find something to do for a couple of hours, he said. Let's see what you can do. As I stood up to head back to the barn, Audra gave me a look that said, Don't screw this up. She clearly didn't want me to do anything that would embarrass her or her boss. During the ride, Chad tried to show off his skills, but it was obvious he knew I could handle myself. We took my thoroughbred and his quarter horse into an open field and let them run. I merged with Brandy, she was incredible. I lost all sense of time as we galloped through the hills. When I finally slowed down and looked back, Chad was at least a quarter of a mile behind me. We stopped at the top of a hill and waited for him to catch up. He was clearly annoyed, but he didn't say anything. We continued the ride, and I let Chad lead more for his ego than because I didn't know all the trails. All too soon, we were back at his house. I directed Brandy straight into the barn and into her stall. Chad dismounted from his horse at the barn entrance and said, "I have to check on my guests." His tone made it clear that I was no longer welcome. I spent an hour removing Brandy's gear and thoroughly polishing her. I missed this. Growing up around horses was a great experience. As I walked toward the house, I saw Chad talking to Audra. He was standing very close to her, and I didn't like it. She turned and looked at me, her expression nervous and a little angry. I walked up to her, and she said, "You smell. Go take a shower and change for dinner." Well, that was a great greeting. She must have been really angry. I went to our room, deciding to shave, shower, and dress for dinner. I needed to win her back. When I came out to join the group, they were all sitting on the terrace. Chad and Audra were deep in conversation, but as I approached, they stopped talking, and Audra looked guilty. I wondered what they had been discussing. Dinner was pleasant, but Audra seemed more distant. She avoided eye contact with me. By the time we finished dessert and after-dinner drinks, it was almost 9 o'clock. We headed to our room, Audra barely saying a word. Once inside, she went straight to the bathroom with her overnight bag. I heard the shower running. She spent 15 minutes in there, and what seemed like an eternity after that doing something else in the bathroom. By this time, I had already undressed and gone to bed. When she finally came out, she was wearing the negligee I had bought her on one of our trips. She looked amazing, and I thought the cold night would turn into an opportunity to make amends for my earlier mistakes. But then she put on a robe, turned to me, and said, "Kurt, I'm spending the night with Chad." I was stunned. I stared at her, speechless, before finally finding my voice. "What? You heard me. I'm spending the night with Chad. What the hell? Is this a joke?" "No. I'm drawn to him, and he asked me to. You're the director of human resources, you know how wrong this is. It's one night. You'll get over it. If you do this, we're done." "Oh, stop it, Kurt. This won't affect us. You must be joking. I can't believe you're even talking about this." "You don't own me," she said, a classic phrase women use when they want to justify doing something wrong, fully aware of it. "You do this, and you can forget about our marriage." I shouted. Then she said a phrase that I was sure Chad had planted in her mind. "Kurt, you rode his thoroughbred all day. It's only fair he rides yours tonight." And with that, she left. I sat there, incredulous. I knew I should have run after her, but the fact that she thought she could do this and I would just accept her back was unbelievable. She could go to hell. I got up and started pacing the bedroom. I approached her side of the bed, and something caught my eye, her wedding ring and engagement ring. The rings I had put on her finger when we exchanged vows. I removed my own ring and looked at it. I squeezed it tightly in my left hand, raised my fist above my head, and then slammed my open palm onto the nightstand. Her rings jumped as I quickly pulled my hand away, rubbing my palm with my right thumb. Damn, it hurt. I glanced at my hand. There was a red imprint of the ring on my palm. Then something snapped in Kurt's mind. His emotions shut off. Cold and detached, he packed his clothes and toiletries into his overnight bag and walked out of the bedroom without looking back. He left the house, bag in hand, out the side door and into his car. As he drove through the community, he waved absent-mindedly at the security guard as he passed the gate. The drive home was uneventful, the streets quiet with little traffic for a Saturday night. Kurt rubbed his palm absent-mindedly the entire way. If he had looked, he would have noticed the bruising already forming. An hour later, he was home. He carried his bag into the bedroom, threw his clothes into the laundry basket, and went straight to bed, falling fast asleep. The next morning, his arm was quite bruised, but he made himself breakfast and sat down at the table, scrolling through the news on his phone. He was absent-mindedly rubbing his arm when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered anyway. "Hello?" he said. There was silence on the other end. He waited for about 10 seconds, then hung up, assuming it was another spam call. He immediately blocked the number, as he did with all spam calls. After breakfast, Kurt decided to go for a run. It had been years since he had run regularly, but he used to participate in 5K and 10K races. He wasn't sure why he had stopped. After some self-motivation, he ran just 2 miles. Out of shape, Kurt decided to start running every day. Meanwhile, Audra walked into her bedroom around 9 a.m. on Sunday morning. The first thing she noticed was Kurt's absence. She went to the dining room to see if he had gotten drunk at the bar and fallen asleep there, but he wasn't there. A feeling of dread came over her. Where could he be? She returned to the bedroom and noticed that Kurt's overnight bag was missing. She checked if the car was still there, but of course, it wasn't. She had feared this might happen, but she still hadn't been prepared for it. He had been furious when she left him, and she couldn't blame him. She had rejected him for some mediocre fling. Tears welled up in her eyes as she sat down on her side of the bed. What had she done? Chad had been so charming, his power and wealth so alluring, and coupled with Kurt acting like a fifth place when she asked him not to ride, she had been driven to leave her husband. Crying, she dialed Kurt's number. "Hello?" Kurt answered. "Oh, Kurt, I'm so sorry. Please, forgive me. Please, come back and get me. We need to talk about this, please." Her voice cracked as she pleaded for forgiveness. There was silence on the other end, and then Kurt hung up. She tried calling back, but he didn't answer. "Oh my God, what should I do now?" she muttered to herself as she wiped her eyes. Her gaze fell on the bedside table. Her rings lay askew, and Kurt's wedding ring sat in the middle. "Damn it," she whispered, picking up his ring. She noticed a perfect circular imprint on the wood, a symbol of their marriage. She remembered the day she had placed that ring on his finger while saying her vows in front of family and friends. She started crying uncontrollably. About half an hour later, Audra entered the dining room, where the others were finishing breakfast. Her eyes were puffy and red. "Audra, are you okay?" one of the directors asked. She sobbed, then sat up straight and asked, "Can someone give me a ride home after you leave?" They didn't ask any questions. They already had an idea of what had happened. They had seen Chad flirting with her the previous day. The wife of one of the directors spoke up. "Of course, honey. We can leave whenever you're ready." Audra felt miserable about what she and Chad had done. She turned and went to gather her things. She put her rings back on, knowing that restoring her marriage wouldn't be easy. She hoped Kurt would put his ring back on as easily as she had, but doubted it. She took off her robe and looked at the negligee Kurt had bought for her on one of their vacations. How could she have done this? What had she been thinking? Clearly, she hadn't been thinking about Kurt or their marriage. She started crying again as she took a shower, trying to wash off the guilt she felt, but after about 20 minutes, she realized no amount of scrubbing could cleanse her conscience. She got out of the shower, dried herself with a towel, and looked in the mirror. At least there were no physical signs of what she had done. She didn't have to hide. She got dressed, packed her things, and didn't even bother putting on makeup. She knew she'd cry again. When she walked out into the living room, overnight bag in hand, the couple who had offered her a ride was already waiting. Their suitcases were packed in the car. "Okay, honey," the woman said. "Let's get you home." The ride was mostly quiet. What could they say? What could Audra say? It was already past noon when she entered their rented apartment. She felt empty. She knew Kurt wasn't there. She went straight to his dresser and opened the drawer. His things were still there. Well, that's a good sign, she told herself, half expecting him to have left already. Meanwhile, after Kurt took a shower to wash off the sweat from his run, he decided to go outside and enjoy the weather, maybe take a walk on the beach. As he got into his car, he put his hand on the steering wheel, then quickly pulled it away. His palm was still bruised. He thought about going to a medical center, but shrugged it off. After walking on the beach, he felt great. By lunchtime, he was hungry and decided to stop for a burger. He sat inside the restaurant, watching people. His attention focused on a young couple, probably around 20 years old. He didn't know why they stood out, but he kept watching them. They were so engrossed in each other, oblivious to the world around them. Kurt smiled at the sight. After lunch, he decided to take a drive along the coast. The scenery was beautiful, but something nagged at him as he drove through the surrounding hills. Audra. She had been trying to call Kurt all day, but it kept going to voicemail. She wanted to hear from him, but it was already 5 o'clock, and she hadn't heard a thing. She started to worry, would he ever come back? She thought about calling one of their friends, but how could she explain why he wasn't with her? Everyone knew they were supposed to be spending the weekend at her boss's place in Rolling Hills. Cleaning, her usual habit when nervous, kept her busy until she suddenly heard the front door open. She walked out of the bathroom and saw Kurt plop down on the couch, pick up the remote, and turn on the TV. "Oh, Kurt, I'm glad you're back. I'm so sorry for what I did. Can you forgive me?" Audra pleaded. Kurt didn't say a word, just continued watching TV. "Kurt, will you talk to me?" she asked, moving closer. He still ignored her, and she hated that about him. When he was angry, he would punish her with silence. "Stop with the silent treatment, Kurt. Talk to me," she raised her voice, but he remained fixed on the TV. Frustrated, Audra grabbed the remote from the coffee table and turned off the TV. Kurt looked puzzled, then muttered, "So, what now?" and began searching for the remote. "Kurt, you have to talk to me. I said I was sorry. Please, talk to me." Audra's voice cracked with desperation. But Kurt just kept looking for the remote, even checking under the couch and on the floor. Angry that he was playing this game, she threw the remote on the couch. "Here's your damn remote. Grow up. And when you do, we need to talk about this." Kurt found the remote on the pillow beside him, looked at it in confusion, shrugged, and turned the TV back on. Audra screamed, "Turn off the damn TV and talk to me," but Kurt sat in silence, staring at the screen. Audra stormed out of the room and slammed the bedroom door. Kurt, after an uncomfortable drive through the hills around Los Angeles, was exhausted. When he got home, he plopped down on the couch, picked up the remote, turned on the TV, and set the remote down. But suddenly, the TV turned off by itself. Confused, he muttered, "So, what now?" and started looking for the remote control. He searched the couch and the floor but couldn't find it. Then, glancing to his right, he spotted it lying on the pillow, right where he had already looked. "What the hell?" he thought. He picked it up, turned the TV back on, and continued watching his show. A minute later, the bedroom door slammed loudly. Kurt assumed it was just the wind. After a while, Kurt felt hungry and ordered a pizza for delivery, a small one with various toppings. $25 for a small pizza, and that's without tip, he thought, shaking his head. The cost of living here is insane. Audra sat fuming in the bedroom. "That idiot ignoring me," she muttered. She should have expected it. Kurt always acted childishly when they fought, using the silent treatment. But this fight was far worse than any before. She would have preferred him yelling at her, glaring at her, anything but this. She needed to know he still cared. Tears welled up again as she struggled to find a way to fix things. Eventually, she must have fallen asleep because when she woke up, it was already dark. She stepped out of the bedroom to check on Kurt. An empty pizza box lay on the coffee table, but Kurt was nowhere to be found. She checked the bathroom and then the guest bedroom. It was locked. Defeated, she lowered her head and returned to their bedroom. Monday morning, Kurt woke up early, determined to start training for a 5K race. He found a Planet Fitness gym near work, signed up, and began running on the treadmill. During his 45-minute run, he wondered why he even lived in California. Sure, there were perks, but the high cost of living, traffic, and outrageous housing prices outweighed them. His motivation at work had been suffering for a while. Kurt worked at Northrop Grumman as a technologist, a self-proclaimed nerd. But today, he was a nerd seeking change. He decided that it was time to talk to his boss about transferring out of California. Yes, he might have to take a pay cut, but the lower cost of living elsewhere would more than make up for it. Besides, there was nothing holding him here anymore. At work, he approached his boss. "Sir, I'd like to inquire about the possibility of a transfer." "A transfer? To another department?" his boss asked. "No, to another state. I want to get out of this place. California is just not for me anymore." "Wow. I'd love to leave too, but my wife won't let me. Between housing prices and all the idiots on the road, my blood pressure would drop 40 points if we left. You're lucky you can go, his boss admitted. By the end of the day, Kurt had opportunities lined up in Wyoming and Montana. He'd still have to go through interviews, but with his boss's recommendation and a strong track record, it felt like a formality. After work, Kurt hit the gym again for strength training. On the way home, he grabbed some Thai food to avoid cooking and settled in front of the TV again, beer in hand. Another night of takeout in front of the TV. What kind of life is this, he thought. Audra woke up Monday morning, glancing at the empty side of the bed. She knew Kurt had slept in the guest room, even before seeing his untouched side. Maybe he'll talk to me this morning, she thought as she headed to the bathroom. Inside, she noticed that his toothbrush, razor, and deodorant were missing. He must have moved them to the guest bedroom. She went to the guest room door and knocked. There was no answer, so she tried turning the knob. The door was unlocked, but when she opened it, Kurt was gone. She picked up her phone and tried calling him again, but once more, it went straight to voicemail. She sighed, deciding to try talking to him in the evening. At work, Audra noticed people behaving differently around her. Clearly, the events of the weekend had not stayed confined to the directors. She would have to address the rumor-mongering and demand that people keep their private lives private. Maybe she could stop it from spreading further. The day dragged on endlessly. She couldn't wait to go home. Kurt usually got home by 5:30, and she wanted to prepare his favorite dish for his arrival. At 4 o'clock, she left work a little earlier than usual, and by 5:25, the chicken Alfredo was ready. She rehearsed what she would say to him. By 6 o'clock, she began to worry. She checked his things, they all seemed to be there, which was a good sign. He hadn't left. By 6:30, anger was beginning to rise in her. The food sat in the oven to stay warm. She tried calling him again, but there was still no answer. All she could do was wait. She kept glancing at the clock, the numbers on the digital display seeming to change at a torturously slow pace. At 7:03, Kurt finally walked through the door. Audra jumped up and went to the oven to get the food. Kurt walked into the kitchen, and Audra said, "I made your favorite. I'll put it on the table now." Kurt opened the refrigerator, grabbed a beer, and walked back into the living room. Audra set the dish on the table and looked at him, sitting in front of the TV, already eating takeout. "Kurt, I cooked dinner. The least you could do is come to the table and eat it, even if you don't want to talk to me." There was no reaction, not even a glance. "Kurt, listen, you have to stop this. You have to say something." Again, there was no response. "Well, to hell with you," she shouted, throwing the chicken Alfredo into the trash. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. She had to find a way to reach him, but what could she do? Half an hour later, she returned to the living room. "Kurt, will you look at me? Will you talk to me?" she begged, her voice quiet now. There was still no reaction. He just continued watching TV. She decided to keep talking anyway. "Listen, Kurt, I know you're angry. I understand what I did was wrong. I wish I could take it all back, but you know I can't. How can we survive this if you won't talk to me? Tell me what you want me to do." She debated whether to tell him she would quit her job, but she had worked hard to reach her position. Her job fulfilled her, and she needed it. Kurt continued to ignore her, leaving her feeling utterly broken. What should she do? Not knowing what else to try, she sat down next to him on the sofa. She knew better than to try to hug or kiss him. Past fights had taught her that when he was angry, he didn't want any physical contact. So, she just sat beside him. For an hour, they sat there in silence. Occasionally, Kurt chuckled at the comedy show on TV, but he still didn't say a word to her. At 8:30, he turned off the TV, got up, and went to the bathroom to get ready for bed. Audra remained on the couch in the dark, tears streaming down her cheeks. She knew she had hurt him deeply, and it would take time for that wound to heal. She only hoped he would give her that time. Tuesday morning, Kurt was at the gym early again, his mind wandering as he ran on the treadmill. He had decided on Wyoming. It was close enough to Nebraska, his home state, but far enough that he wouldn't be expected to visit often. He valued his privacy. When he arrived at work, there was a message from HR. Both Wyoming and Montana had requested interviews. Kurt decided to pursue both opportunities, though he was leaning toward Wyoming. Not wanting to waste time, he scheduled the video interviews for that same day. At 1 o'clock, he had his interview with Montana. It went well, and they had a clear need for his skills. However, Wyoming won him over, not just because of its proximity to home, but because they were working on arming hovering drones with lasers. It was a project that intrigued him, and his current experience would be especially useful there. "When can you start?" they asked. "Give me this week to hand over my duties and wrap things up here. Then I'll need a week to move and get settled. How about the first week of October?" "That sounds good," his new boss replied. "If you need help with anything, feel free to contact me or my assistant. We'll do our best to make your transition smooth." Throughout that week, Kurt stuck to his routine: early morning gym sessions, late nights at work, ensuring all his projects were progressing smoothly. This meant that when Audra made dinner at 5:30 on Tuesday, he was already gone. By Thursday night, she didn't even bother making dinner anymore. He came home late every night, either picking up takeout or eating before arriving. There was still no interaction between them. No matter how many times Audra tried to talk to him, he ignored her. On Friday night, his colleagues threw him a farewell party at a bar. That night, he came home close to 11, clearly drunk, and fell asleep on the couch. Audra was disappointed and unhappy that Kurt didn't even acknowledge her. Feeling lost, she called a coworker and arranged to meet for breakfast. She needed to talk to someone about the situation. She needed help. Her friend was divorced, so maybe she could share some advice on saving a marriage. Audra hoped to learn from her friend's mistakes, especially to understand what not to do. When Kurt woke up, took aspirin, and had his first cup of coffee, he was ready to start packing his clothes and other personal items. 2 hours later, he was surprised to find that all his belongings fit into the car. His lease was still valid for 3 more months, meaning extra expenses, but leaving this miserable state was worth the cost. Without ceremony, he got into his car and drove off. As he exited the complex, he passed a car driving in, but he paid it no mind. Audra noticed Kurt's car as she drove into the complex. "I wonder where he's going," she thought. She had just spoken to her coworker, Melanie, about her divorce, what led to it, and how she could save her own marriage. Melanie had cheated with a family friend, and by the time her husband found out, he had already left the country. It had been that bad. The story Melanie told painted a bleak picture. "Some men, most men," she said, "can't handle the thought of their woman giving someone else what they consider theirs and theirs alone." Audra knew she would feel the same way if Kurt had cheated. How could I ever fix this? She wondered. It was impossible to erase it from his memory. When Audra entered their apartment, something felt off. In the living room, she noticed the TV, DVD player, and game console were missing. "Oh no," she muttered, running to the bedroom. All his clothes and toiletries were gone. She collapsed on the bed. She was too late. Less than a week had passed, and he was gone, no word, no note. He just left. She grabbed her phone and started calling all their friends, no longer trying to hide her affair. Affair, she thought, let's call it what it was, a damn mistake, but none of their friends knew where Kurt was or had heard from him in over a week. She couldn't bring herself to call his parents, who were in Nebraska. She was certain he hadn't gone there. What was she supposed to do now? She felt lost. Work became a challenge. She had to have several conversations with colleagues who made advances toward her, telling them in no uncertain terms that their attention was unwelcome and would not be tolerated. Despite the rumors circulating about last weekend, she had already earned the nickname HR Director behind her back. She didn't mind, as long as it stopped the rumors and her co-workers from harassing her. Knowing it was pointless, she called Kurt anyway. Unsurprisingly, it went to voicemail. Still, she left a message. "Kurt, I saw you leave. I don't know where you're going, but I really want you to talk to me. I love you, and I'm so sorry for what I did. I don't know how to fix this. I'm starting to realize there may be nothing I can do. I screwed up. Please call me. I just need to hear your voice." She hung up, not ending the call with her usual "I love you." She knew it would sound empty. Kurt had a plan. His goal was to reach St. George, Utah by the end of the day. Traveling through the desert was tiring, and there was little to see or appreciate, making it feel like a 10-hour drive even though it would take about 7 to 8 hours. Once there, he would find a motel and start the long drive through Utah and into Wyoming early the next morning. While driving, he reflected on his life. College in Arizona had been a different experience compared to his Midwest upbringing, but Embry-Riddle had helped him realize his potential. It made him the ideal candidate for the Northrop Grumman job. When they offered him the position, he had been thrilled. It was his dream job. The years since had flown by, most of them spent focused on work. California was now behind him, and he was eager to start a new chapter in a new place, with new challenges. Maybe, just maybe, he would find someone new to share his life with, though thinking about that left him feeling hollow. On Monday morning, Audra decided to take time off from work and try to see Kurt at his job. Since he was a contractor for the military, security didn't let her past the reception desk. When she asked to see Kurt, they told her he was unavailable. Of course, she didn't believe them. She assumed they were covering for him. Determined, she asked to speak to his boss. When Mr. G. Heaven came down to the reception area to meet her, he seemed puzzled. "How can I help you, Mrs. Bryant?" "I need to talk to Kurt," she said. "I know he's been avoiding me, but I really need to speak with him. I'm a little puzzled. Kurt doesn't work here anymore." "Friday was his last day," said Mr. Heaven. "Did he quit?" "No, he requested a transfer last Monday. He said he wanted to leave this hellhole of California." "So, where did he go?" I don't think I should give you that information. If he didn't talk to you about it, there's a good reason for it. You're in HR, you must understand that." "So, he left California?" she asked, piecing it together. "I probably shouldn't have even told you that," he admitted. Audra realized she wouldn't get any more information from him, so she said, "Well, thanks. If you talk to him, please let him know I want to talk to him." Mr. Heaven seemed to understand that there were personal issues between them, and Audra was trying to fix things. As she walked to her car, she scanned the parking lot, wondering if she was being lied to. After a few minutes, she sighed in disappointment. Kurt's car was nowhere to be seen. Mr. Heaven had been telling the truth. Kurt's Sunday drive through Utah and into Wyoming was incredible, the scenery breathtaking. He had never driven through Utah before, always flying home from Los Angeles for the holidays. He thought to himself that he would definitely spend more time here now that he lived in the same state. Finding a hotel in Cheyenne was not difficult. It was the end of September, and the tourist season was winding down. He chose to stay at the Town Place Suites by Marriott, giving himself time to find a nice townhouse or apartment while still being able to cook his own meals. The hotel also had a gym, so he could continue his workout routine. He also reminded himself that he'd need to change his Planet Fitness membership to Cheyenne or cancel it and get a new one. This thought prompted a mental list of things he needed to do: open a new bank account, update his job with the new automatic transfer information, and, of course, change his driver's license. He started jotting everything down. On Monday, he set out to complete his to-do list. The DMV experience was exactly what he expected: take a number and wait. Thankfully, it didn't take as long as he had feared. They were efficient. Opening a new bank account was also easier than expected. He even received a debit card on the same day. He would wait for the checks to arrive before closing his California accounts. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Kurt had completed all the tasks on his list. He decided to stop by his new workplace and introduce himself to his boss. His boss was extremely helpful, offering advice on which areas of the city to avoid and which were best for finding housing. After a half-hour conversation, Kurt felt optimistic about their working relationship. Wyoming was shaping up to be a positive change, perhaps even a permanent one. Weeks passed. Kurt adjusted to his new job, and Audra continued her efforts to locate him, but with no success. Finally, she decided to take drastic measures. She picked up the phone and called Kurt's parents. She was sure Kurt had told them everything about her betrayal, and she dreaded their judgment. They were church-going people, and she expected reproaches. "Hello, Carol. This is Audra," she said hesitantly. "Audra. Why so formal? You know you can call me Mom." Audra was puzzled. Had Kurt not told them? "Sorry, Mom. How are you doing?" "Just fine." "So, how do you like Wyoming?" "So, that's where he is," Audra thought. "Not bad," she replied, before taking a chance. "What did Kurt say about it?" "Oh, you know Kurt. He's not a man of many words. He said he was glad to get out of California. I was surprised you didn't mind him leaving." "Well, we discussed it," Audra lied, "but I think we'll get used to the Midwest. I'll give it a chance." "Good. I'm sure you will." "Okay, thank you, Mom. I have to go, but I'll be in touch," Audra said, ending the call. She was confused. Kurt had left without saying a word to her, but he hadn't told his parents about the details of their breakup either. Was there still hope? If he hadn't told them, maybe he was still willing to work things out. But how could they fix their marriage if he wouldn't answer her calls? At least now she knew where he was. She decided to buy a burner phone to call him from, thinking he might pick up if he didn't recognize the number. She immediately went to the store and bought the phone. He must answer, she told herself. She dialed his number. "Welcome to Verizon Wireless. The number you have dialed has been changed, disconnected, or is no longer in service. Please check the number and dial again." She looked at the phone, verifying that she had dialed the right number. Asterisk yes, it was Kurt's number. At least it used to be asterisk. "Damn," she muttered. "He must have changed his number. Now what?" She couldn't call her mother-in-law again and ask for a new number. But at least she knew he was in Wyoming and had transferred to a new job. She went to the Northrop Grumman website and searched for information on the Wyoming branch. They had an office in Cheyenne. Great, the capital, she thought. But how do I find him among 100,000 people? She considered hiring a private investigator to track him down, but what good would that do if she just needed to talk to him? After thinking it over, she decided to take a week off work and try to find him on her own. Meanwhile, at Kurt's new job, everything was going great. He was starting to feel like part of the team. It was the end of October, and the Human Resources Department informed him that he needed to fill out forms to open new benefits. While reviewing his benefits, he noticed that instead of being on a single-person plan, he was on a family plan. There must be some kind of mistake, Kurt thought. He immediately made changes to a single-person plan for the following year and requested a refund. HR looked into it and said they had approved the family plan last fall, and that they couldn't do anything because it was his decision. Kurt was puzzled and absent-mindedly rubbed his palm. He looked at his hand. Under the skin of his palm, there was a circle of hard tissue the size of a nickel. "I should get my hand checked," he thought. Audra. 3 weeks after her conversation with Kurt's mom, Audra sat in her car in front of his work, waiting for his car to pull out of the parking lot. At 5:30, she spotted him and followed him. He drove to the Planet Fitness gym and went inside. Should she go in and meet him? What if he ignored her again and just walked away without giving her a chance? Then she'd lose the opportunity to find out where he lived. She also wouldn't be able to talk to him like a normal husband and wife. No, it was better to wait. An hour later, Kurt walked out to his car and Audra followed him to the hotel where he was staying. She was angry that he had left her, but also worried about how to approach him. How could she do this? Just knock on his door and say, "Hi, can we talk?" She sat in the car, going through different scenarios. He could get aggressive, but that wasn't Kurt's style. He could start screaming and cursing. She would deserve it, and in fact, that would be better than the silent treatment he had given her at home. Maybe he would use that punishment again and just refuse to talk to her. They needed to discuss this. She had made a huge mistake, and she knew it, even while it was happening. But the fact that Kurt didn't listen to her and instead went riding off to show himself off to Chad irritated her greatly. He couldn't stay calm, and his actions jeopardized her position at work. By the time she realized she was making a mistake, she was already in bed with Chad. At that point, the damage was done. Finally, she worked up the courage to go to Kurt's door and ring the bell. She heard Kurt inside approaching the door. She knew he was looking through the peephole. After 10 seconds, he walked away from the door. She started knocking and begging him to open the door and talk to her. There was no answer. Now she was angry. She started banging on the door, ringing the bell, and screaming for Kurt to open the door. The neighbors from the next room opened their door and looked at her. She stopped. "What are you doing?" they asked in an accusatory tone. "I'm trying to get my husband to open the door and talk to me," she exclaimed. "Husband? Kurt lives here. He's not married. I think you have the wrong person. He is married." "We've been married for 3 years," Audra said. The wife of one of the neighbors spoke confidently. "We've invited him to dinner a couple of times, and he categorically stated that he was not married. He dated a girl in college for a while, but it didn't work out. I don't know what kind of nonsense you're trying to pull, but if you don't leave, we'll call the police." Audra stood there in shock. He told everyone he was single. How could he, she thought. Kurt inside the apartment. Kurt had just gotten home, tossed his gym clothes into the washing machine, and put on some sweatpants to relax. Then the doorbell rang. He walked up and looked through the peephole. "Strange," he said to himself. There was no one there. A few minutes later, he heard his neighbors talking on the sidewalk. It sounded like an argument. They were a nice couple, and he hoped they would work things out. As he stood there, he absent-mindedly rubbed his palm, feeling the circle under his skin. Audra. The police won't help here, Audra told herself as she walked back to her car. She needed to find a way to get Kurt to talk to her. As she sat in the car, she thought about their time together. If she hadn't been so clumsy, they would never have met. Why the hell did I do what I did? She wondered. She knew Kurt and his Midwestern values would never have tolerated what she had done. Chad was so charismatic and powerful, it was as if she had no control. At least, that's what she told herself, though deep down, she knew it wasn't true. She knew it was wrong. She knew it would ruin their marriage. But Chad was so convincing, and he had a point to prove after Kurt showed off his superior writing skills. Damn it, Kurt, why did you have to provoke him, she thought, knowing she was shifting the blame from herself to Kurt. She also knew that despite her saying, "You don't own me," it wasn't how either of them felt. They were one. They were each other's most treasured. She started crying again. After 10 minutes, she started the car and drove to another hotel. The night was restless. Audra had nightmares about Kurt disowning her, saying that he never really loved her, that she was just a good body to him. In the morning, she decided to go to his work and talk to him there. At 10 a.m., Kurt received a call from the receptionist, who said someone was at the front desk asking to see him. I wonder who it could be, he thought. When he approached the reception, Chloe, the receptionist, said, "This woman asked for you," pointing to the seating area. He looked around and saw no one. Laughing, he said, "Funny, Chloe. You're making fun of the new guy, huh? Making me feel part of the team already." Then he turned and walked back to his desk, absent-mindedly rubbing his palm, as he often did. Chloe looked puzzled as Kurt walked away. Audra, who had been standing just 5 feet from him, was shocked. Kurt had completely ignored her, not even acknowledging her presence in the same room, right in front of someone else. Chloe apologized to Audra, who explained that she was Kurt's wife, but that they had a big fight. Unsure of what to do, Chloe called the HR specialist. When Mr. Ben Miller arrived, he discreetly assessed the beautiful woman sitting in the waiting room. How strange, he thought. I didn't think Kurt was married, but as an HR professional, he had to handle the situation delicately. "Hello, I'm Mr. Ben Miller. How can I help you, miss?" "I want to talk to my husband, but he doesn't want to talk to me," Audra said. Puzzled, Ben glanced at the receptionist. "She came to see Kurt Bryant," Chloe explained. But when he came out, he completely ignored her and walked away. Now Ben was really confused. Kurt had recently spoken to him about changing his benefits, explaining that he was on a family plan even though he was single. Did he get divorced? Ben wondered. Kurt specifically told me he was single, Ben said carefully. In fact, he changed his benefits to reflect that. Are you recently divorced? No, Audra replied. We had a fight, and he transferred here. Not sure what to say, Ben offered. Let me talk to him for you. When he spoke to Kurt, the man was adamant that he was single. Ben returned to the waiting room and told Audra that Kurt insisted he had no wife. Audra was equally adamant, showing her driver's license, which did have the same last name as Kurt and an address in Los Angeles. She was so persistent that Ben decided to call the Los Angeles office. Mr. Haven from the Los Angeles branch confirmed that Kurt had been married while he worked there. He also described Audra, and his description matched the woman sitting in the waiting room. Everything lined up, her address, her name, but Kurt had said he was single. Miss, please leave your number with Chloe, and I'll try to look into this. Are you staying in the city? Ben asked, privately wondering, a woman who looks like that, either she's made a serious mistake, or Kurt must really want to forget her. Ben decided to speak with a psychologist, concerned that something more complex might be at play. After all, they worked for a defense contractor, and ensuring employees' mental stability was crucial. The psychologist suspected selective amnesia and agreed to see Kurt the next day. Ben informed Audra of this. The doctor believes he may have selective amnesia, he said. What happened just before he transferred here? Audra hesitated. It was clear she didn't want to discuss it. Finally, she admitted, I cheated on him with my boss. Just then, Audra heard Kurt's voice. He was across the restaurant, talking to the hostess. I ordered takeout. Name's Kurt Bryant, he said. Seizing the opportunity, Audra stood up and hurried toward him. Kurt! Oh dear, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me, she pleaded. Kurt stood there, emotionless, ignoring her completely, not even looking in her direction. Audra grabbed his hand. It felt lifeless. She pulled at it, but his body didn't react. She stood directly in front of him, but he continued to ignore her. She began to scream and stomp her feet in frustration. The hostess returned with Kurt's food and addressed Audra. Miss, what's your problem? This is my husband, and he refuses to talk to me. All this time, Kurt remained completely indifferent. Noticing his food, he asked the hostess, Is that my food? The hostess hesitated. Yes, she replied. I've already paid for it. Audra still held onto Kurt with one hand while he took the food with his other hand. Thank you, he said to the hostess and turned to leave, actually pulling Audra along with him. He walked to his car, placed the food on the roof, pressed the unlock button, opened the door, and accidentally hit her with it. Throughout all this, Audra had been begging Kurt to say something to her. When the door hit her, she let go of his hand, and he took the food and got into the car, blocking the door. She started knocking on the window, but Kurt just started the car and drove away. Audra had to quickly step back to avoid having her foot run over. As Kurt drove away, she fell to the ground. Mr. Ben Miller, who had been observing the situation, couldn't believe what he had seen. He walked over to Audra, helped her up, and they returned to the restaurant to discuss what happened. Both were surprised by Kurt's complete disregard for Audra. I'm going to refer him to a psychologist again. Can you send me pictures of you and Kurt together? Mr. Miller asked. Of course, I have a lot of them. I can forward them from my phone, Audra said. Okay, send them to my phone, and I'll give them to the doctor. Do you have a photo of just yourself, maybe a more personal one? That might jog his memory. Yeah, I have a very personal photo, Audra said reluctantly. Perhaps this might help him remember, she added, thinking. And I wouldn't mind adding it to my personal collection. Kurt was called back into Mr. Miller's office and referred to a psychologist. He was puzzled by the need for another visit. Mr. Bryant, please sit down. May I ask why another assessment? There is a problem. It's just a follow-up check. It won't take long, Mr. Miller said. Mr. Miller explained the events of the previous day at the restaurant and mentioned the photographs he had sent. Do you know Miss Audra Jackson, using her maiden name? No, I haven't met anyone with that name, Kurt replied, rubbing his palm. Can you look at this photo and tell me what you see? Mr. Miller asked, showing Kurt a photo of him and Audra taken at a restaurant shortly after they started dating. "This is a photo of me sitting in a restaurant I frequented in the Los Angeles area," Kurt said. "Who else is in the photo?" "There are a few people in the background, but I don't know who they are." "Just some customers," Kurt said. The doctor looked at the photo, noting that Kurt was clearly sitting at the table with his arm around the woman Mr. Miller said was Kurt's wife. He showed Kurt another photo. "This is me on the beach in the gazebo." "How did you get these photos?" "Is the government watching me?" Kurt asked. "Oh no, I got them from Mr. Ben Miller." "He received them from your friend in Los Angeles," the doctor replied. He showed Kurt a few more photos, and Kurt's reaction was the same. Despite his wife being in all the photos, he did not recognize her. Kurt was starting to get a little irritated, rubbing his palm continuously. "One more, Mr. Bryant," Mr. Miller said, showing Kurt a photograph of his wife in a negligee, sitting on the bed. "This photo appears to be of an expensive bedroom, possibly a hotel," Kurt said. "Okay, Kurt, thanks." "That's all," Mr. Miller said, releasing him. Kurt stood up and left, returning to work. When Mr. Miller was informed of the outcome of the meeting, he asked, "Should I be concerned about his work here?" "No, I don't think so. He appears to be fully functional, other than blocking everything related to his wife. There shouldn't be any problem. In the future, he may remember these memories, but he may not. Those years with her were simply filled with his work life. However, if he starts to remember or if there are problems related to his marriage, please contact me," Mr. Miller said. "Mrs. Bryant, I talked to the doctor. The photos didn't help. This is selective amnesia. He forgot about you and your marriage," Mr. Miller informed Audra. Audra remembered what Kurt had told her before she left their marriage to sleep with her boss. She hadn't even said goodbye, she just hung up. Kurt had told her that she could forget about their marriage, and he himself had forgotten it. Realizing that she had ruined her marriage and needed to get back to work, Audra began preparing to head back to Los Angeles. As she got ready, she thought about the end of her marriage and her job. She was sad about her marriage and had mixed feelings about her job. She needed to keep working, at least for now. She needed money to live, and her position as HR director provided a good salary. However, she knew she would no longer be able to treat it with the same zeal. While paying at the hotel, she opened her Gucci bag to take out her car keys. There, at the bottom of the bag, was Kurt's ring. She had brought it with the hope that they might make peace and he would wear it again. What would she do with it now? She would decide that later. As she began the long walk home with tears in her eyes, she said aloud, "I hope you find happiness, Kurt." About a year later, Chad Haverson said, "Why do you look so sad?" "It'll be 1 year this weekend." "I understand," Chad said, and he really did. Since returning from vacation, Audra had been distant. Chad tried to cheer her up and even offered to recreate that fateful night. She categorically refused and told him that his attempts were unwelcome. She warned that any further efforts to create anything other than a professional relationship would result in charges of intimate harassment. Chad took this warning seriously and made no further attempts to pester her. A week later, Audra filed for divorce. She knew the marriage was over but hoped that Kurt might suddenly remember the good times they had shared. Speaking with Mr. Ben Miller, she learned that Kurt still showed no signs of acknowledging their marriage. When the divorce documents arrived by registered mail, Kurt opened the envelope out of curiosity. However, after reading the first few lines, his mind went blank and he threw the envelope and its contents into the trash. He then absent-mindedly rubbed the palm of his left hand. 90 days later, Audra was with her lawyer before the judge. She had the medical report as well as Mr. Miller's report, which made it clear to everyone present that there was no reason not to grant the divorce. She would never forget her marriage to Kurt, but hopefully, she could find someone else and learn from her past mistakes. This weekend, Chad was in his stable, telling his groom to saddle up a thoroughbred horse. The groom looked surprised. Chad didn't usually ride this horse as it was too restive. He preferred the quarter horse, a much lighter horse. However, Audra had mentioned the finalization of her divorce, and he remembered how her husband had controlled this animal with such ease. Chad also recalled how Kurt had performed that weekend. He needed to prove to himself that he was not second best, especially in front of a man who had abandoned such a beautiful woman. Chad had been on the trails for about half an hour when suddenly the horse reared up and threw him off. Chad fell hard, and as he lay on the ground, he felt a burning sensation in his left arm. Raising his hand to his chest, he saw the horse rearing up. He woke up in the hospital 3 days later. His arm was bandaged, and he was confused, trying to remember what had happened. The nurse, noticing his activity, entered the room. "Mr. Person, how are you feeling? You're in the hospital. Did you have an accident?" "I'll call the doctor, and she'll explain everything to you." He didn't even have a chance to answer or ask questions before she was already gone. He tried to remember what had happened but recalled very little. He began to assess his condition. His arm still hurt, he remembered that, and his back hurt, but otherwise, he felt okay. Then the doctor came in. She was a beautiful red-haired woman in her early 40s with a serious but sympathetic expression. "Mr. Han, my name is Dr. Pecan. How are you feeling?" "My arm hurts and my back also hurts, but otherwise, I'm fine," Chad replied. "You fell off your horse hard. What do you remember?" "I rode a thoroughbred horse through the hills around my estate," he said, trying to impress the beautiful doctor. "Something spooked my horse, and it threw me off. I remember falling to the ground and then my arm hurting. That's all I remember." "We'll discuss your arm in a minute. Can you tell me how your body feels? Where else do you have pain?" "My back hurts, but I hit the ground hard," Chad said. "Mr. Everon, call me Chad, please," he said. There was no reason not to move on to first names. "Okay, Chad. I need you to tell me if you can feel your toes." Chad thought for a moment, then panic began to overwhelm him. He couldn't feel his toes, his feet, or even his legs. He raised his head to see if they were there. Yes, they were, but he couldn't feel them, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't move them. "Your horse accidentally stepped on your pelvis with its front hoof. You have internal injuries, and your pelvic bone is broken. If it weren't for your neighbor who was on the trail and called an ambulance immediately, you probably would have died from internal bleeding." Chad was shocked. The doctor continued to explain his condition and prognosis, but he was barely listening. He was paralyzed from the waist down, that was all he could think about. Kurt said to Mr. Ben Miller, "You've been smiling all week. Is there a reason? Maybe you remembered some happy moments from the past?" "No, I don't really know why, but life just seems so great right now. There's no reason to walk around sullenly. It's a sunny day, and everything has been great this week," Kurt replied. He loved his job and had been working on a personal project for the past year, which involved a drone remote control system. They tested it the previous weekend, and even from half a country away, it could control drones equipped with lasers. The laser could hit a target from 3,000 feet with millimeter accuracy. The potential uses in military and law enforcement were virtually unlimited. "This will give us a huge advantage over our enemies," Kurt said, absent-mindedly rubbing the palm of his left hand and feeling a circle under his skin. "I'm happy for you, Kurt. Keep it up in the same spirit," Mr. Miller said. 3 weeks later, Chad was at home, trying to adjust to his new life. He had to move into one of the bedrooms on the first floor since his master bedroom was upstairs, and his wheelchair did not allow him to stay there. He also had to get used to having a colostomy bag and all the new routines and demands that came with his new life. He thought to himself, "What is my life like now?" His groom, cook, and now nurse were very sympathetic to his new situation, but they were simply paid employees. Apart from a few neighbors and the person who found him and called an ambulance, he had no other friends to visit him. Did he have real friends, or were they all just acquaintances? As he pondered this, looking out the window at the hills, his groom entered with a worried expression on his face. "What's happened?" Chad asked. "Sir, I think I need to call the vet tomorrow." "Why?" Chad inquired. "There is a wound on the horse that, despite all the ointments I've applied, does not heal." "Here, let me show you," the groom said, pulling up a photo. There was an obvious wound in the photo, a perfect circle the size of a nickel. Chad opened his left hand and showed it to the groom. Both looked surprised. On his palm was a perfect circle the size of a nickel. They didn't know what to think about it. That night, as Chad was trying to get to bed in his wheelchair, he took off his watch and placed it on the nightstand. There, something caught his attention. There was a print on the nightstand that seemed to match the perfect circle on his palm. He just looked at it, then looked at his hand. What do you think of our story today? It seemed to me that the wife was absolutely not worried about their relationship with her husband and so decided to confess to him what she wanted to commit. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. Until new videos.